the agenda, and for next hour or so, whatever I'll talk about is determined by you on the Slido platform. So please scan the QR code before we begin. To whomever controlling the screen, this is great, but I've got this with me, so I don't really need this screen, so please bring it down.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ang Shay, teacher of JMC program. Let's welcome our Digital Minister Audrey Tang here. Yeah. It's Audrey's second time to visit Ming University. It's a great honor to have Audrey here. Everybody knows she has a unique trajectory from school dropout to genius hacker to the world's first transgender minister. She is the youngest minister, digital minister of Taiwan. She founded her business at the age of 16 and retired at 33. She was named in Foreign Policy magazine of top 100 global thinkers. She is a key figure of Taiwan's national epidemic prevention team in successfully handling of the COVID-19. Many international correspondents want to interview her. Now it's your turn. Let's welcome Digital Minister Audrey.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here, and for the next hour, as promised, I'll be just talking about whatever you'd like me to talk about, and it's very democratic because it's determined by our voting. So the top question at the moment, which talks about social media and technology addiction, is going to be the first topic I'll explore, and then meanwhile, while I'm answering that, please feel free to keep asking questions. If there's follow-up questions, the newest question, the latest question is on the bottom right corner. And if at any time you would like to speak instead of just typing into the phone or a laptop computer, please feel free to raise your hand. And we see that there's like 8 different microphones here, so up to 8 people can speak simultaneously. Well, theoretically. And so also there's microphone on the I apologize in advance if I can't get through all the questions because with just 60 minutes, chances are that there will be some questions left unanswered, but I'll look at all of it. So without further ado, let's begin. For social innovation projects, yes. Okay, no, that's not the entirety of my answer. I am addicted to touchscreen, and I will be the first to admit that. And to manage my addiction, I personally use this stylus, and I've been using the stylus ever since there's touchscreen in personal devices because I think that if I use the stylus or the keyboard, I keep becoming more intentional as I interact with the touchscreen. But if I keep swiping, say, the phone or this tablet, then at some point it becomes the phone swiping me, not my fingers swiping the phone. And so I keep my fingers contact with the touchscreen to absolute minimum, usually just by pinching to zoom out and zoom in, and that's it. I wouldn't linger on the screen for too long. However, of course, that's just personal practice. On the digital social innovation front, what I think is important is to make a space that makes the people more pro-social when engaging in that space rather than more antisocial, because antisocial fuels addiction. The less that you can get from the social solidarity and mutual support, the more likely that we'll get caught into this cycle of addiction with the personal device. And so what I'm getting at is that for things like Slido, I think that's one of the better illustrations of what I call pro-social social media. You see, on Slido, there really is no way to distract into antisocial flame wars. There's no reply button. So even if you want to start a flame war, there's no way to start a flame war. And whatever you write will be projected to the screen immediately on the latest question part. And there's only upvoting by default. There's there's no downvoting. So if you see a question that you think should not be discussed, well, the best way to react is actually to start lobbying the people sitting near you to push some other question you deem more worthy and upvote it instead of wasting any time on the kind of showdown between opposing positions and so on. And so just by two very simple designs, one is the connection immediately to the projector, and one is the lack of a reply button. Suddenly this becomes a space that reminds us what's being talked about, and also like the Tetris next block thing, right? People can think ahead about the next question that's going to tackle, but this brings our attention closer to one another in this classroom instead of distracting to each one's own world. And so the more pro-social our design is, the more likely that this addiction can be overcome by the co-creation, like leading to something productive, like thinking about a question together. And so I think there's a saying, I think due to McLuhan, don't hate the media, be the media. And so what I think the Taiwan model in digital social innovation is doing is just to demonstrate the ways that a pro-social conversation can happen on the internet. And then we can take, for example, the PTT's example to Facebook, saying, look, during the election, all the political and social advertisements must not be funded by non-domestic funding sources, and all the criteria, all the specifications for where the advertisement go need to be completely transparent and published as open data in real time, so that journalists can draw the conclusions and the dark patterns can be avoided, because the candidates cannot just use that social advertisement on social media as a way to circumvent the existing campaign donation laws, which, by the way, was the result of a kind of civil disobedience back in 2014-15 by people saying not only the National Audit Office can audit the campaign donation expenditure, but all the citizens and all the journalists can too. So at the time, we organized a kind of OCR, otaku character recognition, so that people solving CAPTCHAs can help to digitalize the National Audit Office printed records for campaign donation expenditure, because at the time they were publishing it only by Xerox copying and not as open data. And once we get into the National Audit Office, got everything out, scanned, and then turned into an interactive game where people help digitizing it, then each of those cells is kind of like a game and has like 5 people on average looking at it. So we're reasonably sure that the numbers were correct in 2015. And of course, the auditing office in Jiancha Yuan, in the control yuan said, you can't be sure it's 100% correct. And we're like, yeah, that's why you should publish it by yourself. And so by 2018, that's exactly what I did. And then the investigative journalist looked at the records and saw that social media advertisements were not filed by and large as campaign donation or expenditure, which led to this negotiation with Facebook saying, we have this social norm here, and they, through civil disobedience, convinced the public sector. So this is what I call a people-public-private partnership, because the private sector, such as Facebook, know that they will face social sanction if they do not conform to the local norm when it comes to transparency for advertisement for political and social issues during elections. And so that's just one of the very concrete ways where the Taiwan model of social innovation prototyping in the social sector can help setting an international agenda. I hope that answered the question. And if you do have follow-ups, by the way, feel free, like there's a brief time before I just close this question and I highlight the next question. So if anyone want to engage in a conversation or discussion, now is the time. Otherwise, I'll just move on. Going once, going twice. Okay, moving on. All right. So 8 people would like to know, can you list the practices of digital social innovation in Taiwan right now? Sure. I've distilled it down to 3 pillars, and that's fast, fair, and fun. And so the practice is, if it's simultaneously fast, fair, and fun, then it tend to spread, going viral. I think that's the term, even though we're in the midst of a pandemic. But I think the counter-pandemic playbook, for example, is still going on right now, right? We know since last January, the 31st of January, that in any space, if there's 3/4 of population wearing the mask and washing their hands, then we're probably safe. The R value, the basic reproduction number of the virus, of the novel coronavirus, will be controlled to be below 1. But if less than 3/4 of people wear a mask and wash their hands, and I mean in any space, in any district, and so on, and then that place will become the place where community spread become possible. Now, that's like the sustainable goals. We know the goal of 75%, but we didn't quite know how to get there. And so that's where social innovation comes in, because that's everyone's business with everyone's help. So everybody can contribute a little bit more to make mask availability faster, to make the distribution more fair, and also to spread fun messages. For example, the pink mask, where you've probably already heard the story, or the rainbow mask, which went quite popular during the Pride parades, 2 of those parades last year. And nowadays, each event actually design its own mask, so that even when the temperature is getting higher, people still wear the mask for the whole day long during a large event or a large festival, because that became part of the fashion design. That's fun also. And so I think just whatever you can contribute to get people into the mood of working together toward a shared value, a shared goal, in this case, the 3/4 goal, that is where digital innovation happens. And something is, frankly speaking, not very digital, but it's social innovation. For example, last year, there was a professor who called a 1922 hotline, which by itself is a great social innovation right there. More than 2 million calls last year asking for clarification, but also sharing wild new practices. And this professor, Lai Chun Yu, said that, hey, I discovered something. If you use a traditional rice cooker like datong dianguo or guobao dianguo, you don't put water into it and you dry steam the mask, then you kill the virus, but you don't kill the mask. And you can reuse up to 3 times the limited supply of mask at a time. Of course, it's social innovation. It's not industrial innovation. If datong or guobao invented this and patented it, that's called industrial innovation. But that's way outside the original design spec. And so it's certainly social innovation, meaning that people just brainstorm about how to use it in an appropriate way, right? And so once they call 1922, the TFDA, part of the Ministry of Health and Welfare, actually tried it out in a lab setting and found out it's actually true. And so then the next thing we know, Commander Chen Shizhong, in his 2 p.m. daily press conference, started to cook some masks with Professor Lai Chun Yu invited to that press conference explaining it. Right? So what I'm getting at is that it's a very meta thing. It's not a top-down, here are the 7 measures where the society have to follow. This is the entire society just brainstorming based on the shared values, and we at the public sector just serve as an amplifier. So if you think of something genuinely new and it's lab tested, and then with the next thing you know, you're invited on a national TV explaining the traditional rice cooking thing. And so I think right now, what we're currently needed is to get whatever we did for the masks and start to roll it out for vaccines. Already we've got the G0V, the GovZero Civic Tech Initiative, who are now working on a website that help people to book the vaccination for self-paid part of the vaccine. And once the next batches of vaccine become more generally available, this will, just like the mask availability map, reduce the time for people to spend between wanting to get a vaccine to actually getting a vaccine. And in that, we work with the global civic tech community. One of my friends is now the COO, the operation officer of first vaccinate CA for California, and now vaccinethestates.com. And that is a very similar system that is helping the people in the US to kind of navigate a myriad of hospital and local municipality website interfaces so that there's a streamlined way to get to the information of how to get vaccinations rolled out more smoothly. And so we're looking forward to work closely with them, just like how we work with the South Korean people to spread the idea of mass availability and rationing to South Korea, or how we worked with people in Tokyo on the counter-COVID dashboard and so on. There's many such examples because it's a issue of global common urgency. So it's not just digital social innovation in Taiwan, but rather it's a worldwide social innovation, with Taiwan just being one of the labs, I guess, to foster such innovations. Okay, any follow-ups? Yes.
Mentioned that guy talked about cooking masks.
That's right.
Which is pretty fantastic. But when things like that come up, was that on one of your platforms? So if something like that comes up on a platform and people are voting it up because they didn't know it to be true, what kind of control or interference does your organization or whatever run if any of that is false? Like, how can you check that in real time when people are still upvoting it and becoming very excited about it? Do you interfere with it?
This is an excellent question. Yeah. Whenever there's any trending, it could be on our platform, it could be on the, for example, Line platform, where many people share tips, right? If you put some food and some food together in microwave, it will lead to something. This is kind of a formula that always circulates, which is sometimes true, but only sometimes. and so Line partners with the fact-checking ecosystem in Taiwan, which is quite large now, including our leading antivirus company, Trend Micro, which has 防诈达人 virus buster, I think, and also Who's Call, which is a startup that offers the service 美玉仪, and also Kofax, again from the Gov0 G0B community. There's Taiwan Fact Check Center, there's Michael Penn, there's many others, right? So the Line, if you look for the Line fact checking dashboard, you'll find that they work all together as an ecosystem. So whenever Line detects something is trending, it's sent to all those fact checkers. And we're not taking anything down. We're basically saying it's notice and public notice. Once people flag something as spam, essentially it's like flagging your incoming email inbox as spam, in the hope that if sufficient number of people do that, then the same sender, once they send to some other person, that will go to the junk mailbox, not the inbox, if a sufficient amount of people deem it as scam or spam. And so in the same way, when people long press a certain message on the Line platform or forward it to Trend Micro Spot or any of those spots, all these signals are gathered together. And on the public dashboard, you can actually literally see which things are getting viral and their fact check in real time. So if this fact check is false, then it's still spread, but now just with this kind of labeling, like on Facebook, once you click share, it will have a frame around it that says the fact checker noticed that this is not true. And if you invite the Trend Micro bot to your chat room, soon as you paste a link to that or an image of that, and now recognize image and video too, then it immediately says, oh, it has been debunked. And so this is like a crowdsourced immune system, and it's not state-run, because if it's state-run, then they can't fact-check us, and we also need fact-checking. And so it's the social sector kind of cross-checking collaborative function. And we run it only in the sense that we help contributing the clarification when asked by the professional journalists, but we don't call ourselves journalists or fact-checkers. That's entirely in the journalistic and social sectors. I hope that answered your question.
Maybe just one last thing. How those fact checkers funded? Are they funded well?
Well, Trend Micro, I think, funds it very well, and the GEC, the Global Engagement, is part of the State Department in the U.S. Actually, get a really large competition going a couple years ago, before the pandemic, and Trend Micro's team was the team that won the top prize. So the prize money is also quite high. In general, there is a business case to do here, right? It's not just about counter disinformation or counter rumor, but also also about countering scams. It's also like Who's Call is about blocking unsolicited phone calls and things like that. And so it's quite likely that they will fund the counter disinformation as part of the larger counter misinformation, counter scam, and so on ecosystem. And so there is a business model. On the other hand, the Taiwan Fact Check Center, I think, relies on crowdfunding in the sense that it's just small-scale donations because they don't accept like over 1 million, I think, donations per individual, and they don't accept like political party or politicians' donations either. And so some sort of crowdfunding is keeping them afloat. But on the other hand, I mean, Wikipedia is crowdfunded too, so there's nothing wrong about crowdfunding. Right. Any other follow-ups? Okay, let's move on. So Sarah would like to know, how can issues related to the environment be made a priority using your popular vote system when some of those problems requires unpopular solutions? One possibility is to give the environment a vote. Right? If a river can cast a vote, a mountain can cast a vote, I'm sure that they will vote for the more pro-environmental ones. And this is not purely fantasy. Already in parts of Canada, I think in New Zealand, natural personhood is already a thing. In New Zealand, where they have a peculiar constitution. I put constitution in quotes because it's not a constitution, it's a treaty between the indigenous people and the non-indigenous people. They already have this idea of the spirits of the Wananui River, of a certain national park and things like that, to be taken care of by professional custodians who can then join for example, on the board of a company representing the river or representing the national park's interest and things like that. And if this sounds strange to you, I mean, corporate personhood is also strange in exactly the same way. And so there's nothing in our legal system that's incompatible with the idea of natural personhood. And nowadays, there's many legal devices, such as the lawsuits based on future generations' interests. That's another way to give future generation a vote with the judicial system and things like that. So I think our kind of shared fictions that's part of our governance system certainly allows our democracy to expand, to include in the demos, in the citizens, not just the people above 18 years old, but rather people who are much younger and people in the next generations and people who are not Homo sapiens. It's just up to us to invent such legal fictions and write it into our legal code. And I draw a lot of inspirations from this indigenous movements, other parts in the world. And in Taiwan, as part of our, for example, National Languages Act, we are now looking at, for example, that we have 20 national languages now, the majority of which are indigenous. And in many indigenous nations, they take a very different view about spirits and beings and things like that. And I think these could flip the idea of just counting adult population in national level votes, where each person only upload 3 bits every 4 years. That's called voting, or every 2 years or so on, a very small bandwidth into a much more continuously integrated bandwidth. And so just flipping the priority, I think that will help. Another thing that will help is to change the voting from voting persons only to voting for issues, for priorities too. I mean, for Slido, this is obvious, right? You're voting on each other's questions. You're not voting to determine 3 representatives of the class to who gets to ask me questions. Although you can easily imagine it that way, I think you'll agree that this way is much more flexible and much more fluid. In a similar sense, every year we run a system called Presidential Hackathon. And Presidential Hackathon is quite unique in that it has an international track. This year's theme is climate action. And then it has a domestic track where anyone can propose anything that belongs to one of the 17 sustainable goals. So it has to be kind of pro-future generation by default, because we only accept those things. And then every year there's like more than 200 different ideas. But at the end of the day, only 5 teams win the trophy from President Dr. Tsai Ing-wen. And the trophy is the shape of Taiwan with a microprojector underneath. And when you open the microprojector, it projects Dr. Tsai Ing-wen presenting the trophy to you. So it's self-describing, it's very meta. And what it does is that it represents presidential commitment. If you spend 3 months during the presidential hackathon to, for example, co-create a system where people help the environment by not buying plastic bottles, by using a app called Feng Cha, the tea serving app by Circle Plus. Circle Plus is the name of the team. So you can, on your phone, look at the nearby places where you can refill your bottles rather than buying new bottles. And it's shaped like the Pokemon Go. So it's kind of collecting coins and checking in and having a conversation and redeeming those 50 coins you collected over 50 days for some local tea and local food and things like that. And there's like kind of weekly missions, just very Pokemon Go style stuff. And it also serves as a great way to remind oneself to drink, because they partner with our National Academy and the Ministry of Health and Welfare, so that there's push notifications that can remind you that according to the temperature and the sunlight and the wind and so on, it's likely that you're going to suffer heat damage. And so please drink them and things like that. So it's a multi-purpose platform, and they try it out on a very small scale during the presidential hackathon, but it's a sufficiently good idea. So they get the presidential commitment saying that we will, within the next year or so, have sufficient budget and regulation and personnel to make it a national thing. So nowadays, our national oil company, 中油, now they have a slogan that 加油就是奉茶的意思, something like that, right? To add oil, to refuel is to serve tea. It doesn't make sense, actually. But anyway, so with that slogan, they turn all its gas stations into water filling stations. And there's many other networks that joined this because of the presidential commitment. And so this is, of course, multi-SDGs, right? It's both for circular economy, for not wasting the plastic, but also to improve health. It's also to improve social solidarity. There's many different goals met in that one idea. So every year, those 5 ideas are determined by voting, but we use a new voting system called quadratic voting that maximizes the unpopular solutions likelihood to get votes if people can discover synergies between their long-term goal and that particular idea. And the voting system called QV, or quadratic voting, is very easy to explain. Everyone online gets 99 points. And with 200 or so projects, you can vote on any project. But each project, if you vote 1 vote, that costs 1 point. But you want to vote 2 votes, that's going to cost you 4 points in total. 3 will cost you 9 in total, 4, 16, 5, 25. And so with 99 points, one can only vote 9 votes, because 10 would cost 100 and you don't have 100, right? So with 9 votes cast, that's 81 points gone and 18 left. People are motivated, instead of like many other online votes, just to vote everything and then just do something else, right? People who get mobilized to vote 9 votes for something will be asked, you have 18 left, what else would you like to look at? And then they will look for synergies and maybe vote 4, and then they still have 2 left. So each person is motivated to look at least 4 different projects to search for synergy, and maybe they take some of the initial 9 back. Maybe they do a 7 and 7 and so on. So on average, each person votes like 5 or 6 or more projects to identify the synergy. So once we use the quadratic voting to choose the top 20, it's very likely that the other 180 or so can actually be reshuffled to join the top 20 teams that has the synergy with whatever they were originally trying to do. And so they could bond together and just think of a more cross-sectoral composition than any of the initial team's composition. And that almost by definition made it much more likely to feature the environmental and social, not just the economic initiatives and motivations. And so this is just one of the mechanism designs of quadratic voting, initially from the Ethereum community. And we're looking for more ways to design such mechanisms so that people are more willing to share more bits of information per vote, and also to identify more synergies for long-term thinking. I hope that answers some of the question. So, okay. Moving on, 9 people would like to know, why does digital social innovation become a trend today and should be adopted by countries worldwide? I think nowadays, when we think about the digital society, there are people in many jurisdictions, especially during the pandemic, who think that whatever the government's measure is doing, it's taking some of the power away from individual citizens and into the state, into the public sector. And I'm thinking of measures such as lockdowns, but also because there's in many jurisdictions a associated infodemic that goes with the pandemic. So for many jurisdictions, especially around our corner of the world, it become an excuse to take down, also to censor speech, often in the name of necessity. And even in some arguably was democratic jurisdictions, there's sufficient motivation to do that during the twin pandemic and infodemic. But when the government starts to do such top-down measures of lockdown or shutdown or takedown, people start to feel that digital isn't for all, right? It's just absorbing the powers that people used to have and then just dictating what people have to follow without fully explaining why and without giving them the opportunity to share whatever they're encountering. And so I think it became a trend today for 2 reasons. One is that with the lockdown in many places, for people, the idea of neighborhood changed. Instead of a physical neighborhood, it became that people who share similar pains, people who share similar interests, people who share the similar aspirations, they become neighbors, they become community, and separated only by time zones and sleeping patterns and not much else, assuming universal broadband, of course. And so that's one side of it. And another side is that people were justifiably afraid that it would be a kind of power grab moment for either the surveillance state or the surveillance capitalism to take away possible choices. And so people are motivated to prove that actually the social sector can do a lot of good, that a free and liberal democratic order of journalists and civic media can actually reveal the actual what's going on instead of just spreading disinformation and misinformation. But it takes a certain configuration, the fast, fair, and fun, for these pro-social impulses to be turned into actual co-creation, not captured by divisiveness and polarization. And so the world become more interested in the Taiwan model because we've shown that there's no need to make a kind of trade-off between civil liberty on one side and counter-pandemic and infodemic on the other, but rather you can just take both of this and then create something better. So I think that's why we're getting much more attention because we've been running this counter-disinformation model, this mimetic engineering, this humor over rumor, this cute dog stuff since at least 2016, maybe 2015 already. But the world is now paying a lot more attention, I think, because of the twin threats of pandemic and infodemic around the world. So that's the brief version. This is easily a seminar topic, but I think I'll just give time to other questions too. Right. 7 people would like to know, can you predict the trend of digital social innovation in 5 years future, in 2026? And how should we prepare to have an earlier step? I think in 5 years, we will probably see that the co-presence, that is to say, the chair next to me, which looks empty, in 5 years, it could be joined by anyone in some other time zone. And this is variously referred to as extended reality or mixed reality. Nowadays, really the only constraining factor for mixed reality is the norm, is people's habit, is whether it's considered normal to do so. But back in 2017, when I joined the UN Geneva building as part of the Internet Governance Forum in the form of a walking telepresence robot mounted on an iPad, people also thought it's quite strange. But nowadays, last year, the whole UN Assembly is telepresence. So, I mean, a pandemic can really accelerate the change of norms, the change of what's feeling as normal. And with 5G and beyond 5G, in 5 years, we're going to see the initial 6G roll out. It means that we're not constrained in the meeting rooms such as this one or at the UN Geneva meeting room for low latency, high bandwidth connection that's required for mixed reality to happen. It will probably mean that anywhere that has a line of sight to some satellite up there on the sky will have the same access to the fastest gigabit network connection as we enjoy now in the rooms. And I think that will free us from those rooms. We will be able then to join each other on the, hiking trail or as part of the top of Taiwan. I'm trying to think of the indigenous name, the Savia or Penduganung, that's the name for Jade Mountain, for Yushan. People can, with just a drone or something on Yushan, project the co-presence so that we can all enjoy the experience of on the Yushan together without actually spending the energy to climb there. But we can follow each step and things like that. So I think the future is already here, actually. If you invest now in the virtual reality, not just for gaming, but for designing such interactive experiences, you'll find out that currently it doesn't cost much. Mostly it's just the difficulty is to convince other people to share the experience with you. And then you can maybe just try to create something on those spaces. And I enjoy, for example, when I had a conversation on VR, in VR with some primary schoolers and middle schoolers, that was in 2016, I experimented to dial my avatar to be at the same height as they are and deliberately chose a playground that are more familiar with them so they can not, look up to me, like literally, but rather have a very normal conversation and have a conversation around the way they look at the environment, not me looking kind of top down, like literally top down to the environment. And that's something exciting to me. And you can also change the sound attenuation. You can add some live interpretation stuff and things like that. And so I think that's one early step that everybody can try to take now, and then in 5 years you will be able to take all this outdoors without being constrained by fiber optic lines and things like that. Okay, right? 7 people would like to know, amid increasing disinformation, how can Taiwan ensure that media literacy policies are adequate for digital natives and the next generation? We can't. The term literacy kind of assumes a radio and broadcast television mindset where a few elites working in journalism, that's all of you, produce the stuff for the mass to read and consume, right? That's probably the mental model for most of the last century when we talk about media literacy. But nowadays, in Taiwan's basic curriculum, we changed the word to media competence or Métis Suyang, as in core competency, rather than media as a literacy, because we understand with universal broadband, all the middle schoolers, maybe they have more Instagram followers than I do, right? And they are their own media. Anyone can start live streaming. There's no marginal cost. Everybody already paid $16 a month for unlimited bandwidth, so might as well use it more, right? It's bidirectional. And so what we're seeing now is that media competence makes sure that when those middle schoolers can fact check the three presidential candidates during our previous presidential election in real time, finding out which part of which sentence is personal feeling and which are fact-checkable material and correcting them in real time. That's really empowering. And we've got many people in basic education joining the professional journalists in such real-time fact-checking. For environment, we've got thousands of primary school students running air boxes, measuring PM 2.5 and other air quality with small IoT devices so that they join this distributed ledger to paint an accurate picture or a more accurate than before picture when it comes to where air pollution comes and where air pollution need to be managed and focused. Again, these are the digital competence skills that can't be taught. It can only be learned. The very abstract ideas about data bias, about data stewardship, about data collision, about GDPR compliance, about joint data controllership means nothing to those primary schoolers, but once they start running airboxes and joining this larger distributed ledger of environmental sense making, then it made a lot of sense, and indeed they can share their own narratives, contributing to the community as early as maybe 7 or 8 years old. And so these are, I think, the message that I think needs to be conveyed to the digital natives, in the sense that everything is up to us to create and co-create, and there is no ready one-size-fits-all media or digital narratives that we only comprehend with media literacy classes. And so actually that also applies to the crowdsourced fact-checking. We were just talking about that, right? The middle schoolers, the primary schoolers, they can all help fact-checking. And on the platform, the Join, the GOV, the TW national petition platform, more than 1/4 of new initiatives are from the people who are younger than 18 years old, meaning that they already organized quite well to fight for, I guess, climate justice, but also human rights and many other things as well. They're the most active group. The next most active groups are the 70 and 60 years old. So the people on both sides of the kind of age demographic are natural allies because they have more time on their hands, I'm sure. And so these are the kind of media competence and digital competence policies that basically said even before you turn 18, you're already welcome to co-create our future together and to ensure a good quality of not just data and media, but of democracy as well. Yes. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Yavor. I actually asked the question.
Cool.
And it is an honor to be able to ask you this question and to meet you in person. I've been following you for quite a while. My research is on digital and media literacy in general. And my data suggests that although younger people in Taiwan are very good at using the technology, what we call the use, creating and sharing, the data suggests that younger people fail to fact check. In fact, only maybe 10 to 12% actually ever did fact check information. So my question actually was quite general, but in particular, could you please maybe give a little bit more detail as to how can we ensure that younger generation is not easily, manipulated, especially knowing that there is more and more disinformation coming from mainland, and
Well, when you say fail to fact check, does it mean that they've never seen such public notice labels on Facebook or Instagram, or they don't use Facebook anymore, or Instagram, or whatever other platforms that they're using, or they don't actively seek out for fact checkers?
All right. Half of the respondents said that they have neither know about fact checking nor did they engage in any kind of checking what they read. About, as I said, about 12% have actively pursued that. And then those in between, they have heard that there's something like fact checking, but they have not really themselves.
Like they occasionally saw a incoming email marked as spam, but didn't really learn about the underlying mechanism.
Yes, exactly. So how can we ensure that there is maybe more critical thinking or more proactive behavior in the younger generation? How can we instill those values so that then we can maybe try to defend the younger mind from being influenced, because younger people.
The percentage is defined this way is higher than I would imagine. The people who read Wikipedia and fix a typo, I think it's not even 10%. Most people just read Wikipedia and incorporate it as part of their homework or something. I mean, they don't actively fact check Wikipedia either. And active editors, I think that's even in the very low percentage number. So there's a natural power law here for any utility that's involved. But I think the important thing here is not whether they make a habit of fact check, but rather whether they feel that when they make a narrative, when they make a film or make a social media post or things like that, whether they think about kind of the effect their message, their frame has, or whether they bother to check the sources themselves before posting it. So what I'm trying to get at is that I put more emphasis on the competence of everyday practice of posting, and instead of on the kind of receiving end of critical thinking, which I think is important, but it's harder to teach without looking at them as basically civic media or civic journalists. So I think organizing more petitions, I may be biased here, but I think organizing more petitions is actually a really good thing, because once people join a petition, even if they may not bother to fact check the petition, once the petition reaches a certain threshold, people will go back and think, oh, what did I just sign, right? And so that is a great opportunity for people to have a more in-depth deliberation between the various different positions, because you've already signed, right? You're basically obliging yourself to commit a certain number of minutes into understanding at least what the externality will be if this petition actually passed. And so it's kind of like a training wheel, because they're not yet 18, they can't be part of the referendum, although we see the same dynamic playing out for the referendum too, right? So a mini referendum that's binding either on the national scale with the joint platform or in many of the ways, for example, determining what to wear, what cannot be worn during school hours in basic education. It's actually a popular topic that many schools are having a conversation in the past couple of years. And nowadays also the hours, like they want to get sufficient amount of sleep, they don't want to attend the 8th class, they want to arrive to the school later, a little bit later. Everybody start to notice that Taiwan's school hours are the longest in all of OECD, or almost the longest, and things like that. And these, I think, encourage the kind of more balanced journalistic thinking or media competence that I have in mind. And the fact-checking and so on are kind of instrumental in getting this happen, but they're not an end in itself in forming such a more mature civil society based on basic education. And so, yeah, if people are interested about that, there's a website called mlearn that has these kind of educational resources and more at mlearn.moe.gov.tw, and I'll encourage people to try this out. It could be part of lifelong education too, not just this basic education, but it's designed for basic education. Yeah. So I agree with what you have observed, but I'm slightly more optimistic. More senior people, yes.
What parallels do you see in what they're suggesting in terms of their projects, or is there discontent or something? Because in some other countries there's these talks of ageism and a disconnect between those two groups, specifically of what they think is more important for society. You have data, like what have you seen sort of similar? Like, are they actually similarly minded, or do they have very opposite ideas?
I think they're similarly minded. For example, there was a teenage person, Wang Xunru's the name, who petitioned to ban plastic straws from takeout of bubble tea. Well, not just bubble tea, but pretty much everything else. And we found out the people who joined her cause are predominantly very young or very senior people. And there's a lot of very senior people, of course, in the environmental activism circles in Taiwan. But the young people know how to work the internet, right? to start a social media campaign based on, I don't know, sea turtles and a plastic straw in a photo or something. And so they get a lot of people to start to care. But when it comes to proposing like feasible solutions or feasible ideas to get us from point A of a lot of straw use in plastic to point B where we can reduce these straws, a lot more senior people have, as I mentioned, actually a lot more time on their hands and also a lot more experience working in the social sector, but also in the actual industry that can analyze the various different kind of solutions, the glass straw, the biodegradable straw, the redesigning of the cup to avoid the use of straw and things like that. And they're very happy to lend their expertise. I think that the unifying sentiment when it comes to environmental issues is that these two groups of people tend to think very long term. Whereas the people currently in an industrial sector obviously also need to worry about how it impacts the line of business or their supply chain they're in. But the people on those two ends will simply care more about the future generations. I think that's the unifying factor. Was there a question there? No? Okay. All right, let's move on. So, people would like to know, it seems much of Taiwan's future security could depend on its ability to bring global attention to the island. Can technology help achieve this goal? Well, it's not just our ability to bring global attention to the island. It's the global ability to bring global attention to the island. And obviously, we're now saying that around the world, people are saying that we're now in the quote most dangerous place unquote on Earth. And I think that's great, because that means that we can focus on the message of Taiwan can help, Taiwan is helping, let Taiwan help. This whole, we're helping the world, not needing the world's help, but the other way around. And that should be our core message. But the other jurisdictions, the other economy, other liberal democracies are now, of course, saying that Taiwan can't, get into the hands of the authoritarian polities for various different geopolitical, but also other reasons, technological reasons, many other reasons. And I think it's great that they're spreading the message so we can focus on the humanitarian and innovation messages. And so technology definitely helps. I think one of the people's ideas about giving to the worldwide community really comes to the fore when I received last year on Twitter a tweet saying, and I quote, I have plenty of masks at home and I want to dedicate my uncollected rationing quota to international humanitarian workers. Please design an app to make it happen. End of quote. Right. This kind of message actually get viral on social media very easily, and not just by Taiwanese people retweeting, but by pretty much everyone, because this shows the sentiment of we're all in this together. And if we are managing the pandemic well, this is not just to take care of our own health, but it also means that we have spare capacity to send to international people. That, of course, includes, well, nowadays, oxygen making machines and things like that. But back then, there was mask making machines, the entire blueprint and so on, that we also gave to the world. And we eventually did design into the National Health Insurance app that you can just refrain from collecting from the mass rationing quota. And after a couple of weeks, just with a click of a button, you can dedicate and optionally write your name publicly on open data for everyone to remember. It's just like NFT, right? To mint a kind of witness that you have dedicated this amount of mass quota. And it's very popular. I think more than 7 million masks dedicated this way, and it became a really powerful message for the international community, and it's included as part of that Taiwan Can Help That Us. This New York Times advertisement turned into crowdsourced YouTuber messaging, turned into online massive open course featuring the YouTuber Chen, vice president at the time, and the textbook author of epidemiology and so on. So it really became a very not top-down but coordinated peer-to-peer message that we're sharing. And without crowdfunding in the I think it was right, which funded the Taiwan Can Help That Us campaign, without crowdsourcing of the open data, the coalitions of people dedicating the masks, without the co-creation of YouTubers and so on, none of this would be possible. And so digital social innovation is the underlying infrastructure that made this very powerful international message happen. And I think it definitely already helped achieving this goal. And we're now also using the same kind of communication infrastructure to communicate about not just pandemic management, but as we mentioned, infodemic management. The idea, if you search for nerd immunity, you'll see that in various places, the Taiwan model to counter infodemic has reached many international commentators' radar. So not just herd immunity, nerd immunity is also important, and technology helps too. Any follow-ups? If not, okay. So how well do you think Taiwan is doing in regards to the SDG of gender equality? Well, by global, like SDG 2030 goals, I think we're doing quite well. Our participation in, for example, the parliament is very high. I think more than 40% right now. But there are, of course, parts, for example, on science, technology, engineering, and math graduates. I think we're just barely over 1/4 when it comes to women participation, which is why recently Dr. Taiwan, our president, celebrated this girls in cybersecurity idea, where because as this part of STEM, cybersecurity is one of the subfields that is the most unbalanced when it comes to gender parity. And so Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, our president, is of course 100% women. She would really like people to consider becoming a white hat hacker as a really good thing to do as a young woman. And indeed, I mean, the CEO and probably a lot of the leadership team in Trend Micro, our leading cybersecurity company, are women. And so there really is no reason why women can't excel in cybersecurity. And so that become a presidential priority. And so there's always room to do more. We mostly compare against ourselves because in our corner of the world, there's really not much else to compare with. And I think by international standards, we should get much better ratio for STEM education and many other things in 2030. So I'm reasonably optimistic that we'll meet our own SDG goals in terms of goal 5. And I'm also really getting a lot of inquiries from, say, Japan and so on, who really want to know how did we manage to keep the people who are more conservative happy when we, for example, passed the gender equality, the so-called Hyperlink Act, without offending or offending too much the sensibilities of the family-to-family relationship, the kinship relationships that the Japanese people are currently still struggling with, although they've recently been making some progress on that on the local court as well. So there's also many things here for us to share, not just to meet our SDG goal. Okay, all right. So 7 people would like to know tips you'd give to someone starting out in the digital industry. Sleep for 8 hours a day. If you can't make it 8 hours a day during one night, like if I slept only for 6 hours a night, I make sure that I take a nap during lunch break, so that I can still meet 8 hours of sleep, like 6+2 or 6+1+1 or something like that. And when I say 8 hours of sleep, I mean exactly that, not 8 hours in bed with your mobile phone. And so, and the reason why is that the digital industry is quite unique in that you don't need to wait for the manufacturing line. You don't need to wait for the physical environment in order to realize your ideas. So because instant gratification is the norm in the digital industry, so it's very easy to burn out, actually, because there's always kind of one more turn. If you've played any of those strategy games, you know, the idea that, oh, I just add one more tweak and then I'll go to bed. But because that one more tweak also has unforeseen repercussions, so after 10 minutes and you learn about it, and then you stay up more, right? So the way I manage this is actually very simple. In my residence, I don't have a laptop, so I can't bring work with me. And in the place where I sleep, there's no device that connects to the internet. There's only an iPod Touch that doesn't have a SIM card, that serves as alarm clock and not much else. And so I'm not selling iPod Touch, but any unconnected device with you. So the point here is that to design the structure so that there's sufficient number of hours in the night for you to truly be with the more creative subconscious and unconscious part of yourself. That's where the creativity actually springs from. And no amount of like late night sprints can replace the kind of creativity that's sprung from full nights of sleep. So that's at least my personal experience that really made the world of difference. So that's my tip to you too. And with that, I think we're done for the hour. Thank you for the great questions.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. And we should look now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.